Hi guys, and welcome back to Autism Journeys radio show and podcasts. Today, I'm absolutely delighted to welcome back to the show Doctors Amy, Laurent and Jacquelyn Fede, the co-founders of Autism Level Up. So ladies, thank you so much for joining me today.
We are super excited to be here.
Amped up.
Now we've huge amounts of information to get through, so we'll get started if that's okay. And I suppose you can fight amongst yourselves as to who's going to answer what questions or whatever. I leave that over to you. But I suppose first and foremost, we're going to look at emotional regulation and sensory regulation. So can you guys explain to my listeners what emotional and sensory regulation are, please?
So yeah, we can. I suppose I'll start and she'll jump in. So we really focus a lot of our work on this concept of emotional or energy regulation because we know that it is the foundation for all active engagement and learning and being able to participate in activities, right? You have to be in a state that supports your ability to attend, participate, interact, and all of those things. So we also know that autistic individuals struggle with regulation. They struggle with regulation from a variety of perspectives, whether it's from social understanding or for underlying neurophysiological differences, that this is an area that can be quite difficult. So it's an area that requires support for them to be able to engage in life the way they want to, and to be able to participate in the activities and things that they're interested in.
A big thing that we emphasize at Autism Level Up is not just the emotional piece of it, but the energy piece of it. We often find that stripping away that socially constructed layer that can be more abstract for people, especially for people who have not attended to the social world for the course of their lifetime, that those words like happy and sad and angry can be not so authentic to their real state and what they're experiencing. So we also like to put it in the framework of these states of arousal or energy, things like that are more about, is my energy lower or higher? So we think about where someone's energy is in those terms. Where is my energy? It's amped up and fidgety, I'll tell you that. And then what's needed for what I'm doing. For me, that's a great fit for this activity. Trying to provide information and relay messages to an audience. And so Autism Level Up would consider me well-regulated for what I'm doing. That's kind of a little crash course in Autism Level Up energy regulation.
And Sharon, I think it's important for people to know, if they don't know Jacquelyn and I, just to know that she is autistic and I am not. And so it is really the coming together of these two perspectives that forms this kind of body of work that we do, or this thought process.
Absolutely. And I suppose, ladies, yeah, I know that you've got some fantastic tools on your website, Autism Level Up website, and on your website, Amy Laurent, or Amy-Laurent, I think it is, .com, that people can actually access as free downloads in order to kind of start that figuring out what energy regulation versus that emotional piece that you're talking about, Jacquelyn, actually looks like, and making sure that energy levels match the activity at hand, or the energy needed for the activity at hand, rather than expecting somebody to say happy, sad, mad, calm, hyper, or whatever the case may be. Yeah.
That's
Yeah,
right.
we do.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, we absolutely do. And we are all about access, and we want people to have opportunities to explore these supports and download them for free. And, you know, keeping with the work that you do, Sharon, it's really about meeting the person authentically where they are and how they process the world, and embracing their strengths, as you have been featuring over the course of this month, and making sure that we're supporting them in those areas.
Absolutely. Jacquelyn, did you want to add something to that?
No, if I was going to add anything, she covered most of what I wanted, but I will say that the supports are great because they are visual in nature. So they make very explicit the where is my energy right now? Where do I need it to be for this activity? And that's the foundation of, so do I need like a tool, a strategy, something to help me make those arrows line up, or do I just need to maintain?
Yeah, perfect. Thank you, ladies. Can I ask you, what are those kind of key behaviours then? And behaviours meant in in a respectful way, rather than this behaviours of concern and challenge that we are that challenge that we so oftentimes hear. What are these key behaviours that we see in autistic individuals when they are supporting that kind of energy regulation and like kind of suiting themselves to be able to match their energy levels to the activity at hand?
Do you want to talk a little bit about the cards, Jacquelyn, or do you want me to start?
I don't know what you're talking about, so you start.
Okay. So one of the tools that we have developed on our website is to help people think about what strategies could be useful for powering up or powering down their energy. And it's a packet of cards. And so it really, there's a set for powering down and there's a set for powering up, and for different levels of needing to make a shift, right? Because if you only have to shift one level, the intensity of that strategy probably isn't as great as if you have to shift 3 or more levels. But when we design these cards, such that there's a set that has generic strategies on it and things that are pretty much consistent with supporting either increasing energy or decreasing energy in a nervous system. And on those cards specifically, we included strategies that are very common and useful and authentic to the autistic neurology, in addition to more conventional strategies. So specifically on some of like our power down cards, we have things like hand flapping or talking to oneself, rocking, in addition to things like jumping, going for a walk, asking somebody for a hug, those more conventional strategies. I will say one more thing, and then I do want to pass it to Jacquelyn to expand on that point, is just that we also have a set of cards that are blank. So we put ideas in there to get people thinking about the types of strategies that fit in these categories. But our goal is that these supports will truly be individualized to support an individual learner or person or individual who could benefit from them.
Perfect.
Yeah, and I think the great thing about those cards, including things like flapping, rocking, echolalic speech, is that it's making it very explicit to a neurotypical partner and to an autistic learner that these are like key things that my brain and my neurology craves and that will be effective for me. It sets the foundation for advocacy, and it sets up the neurotypical partner to not be biased by their own perspective, what works for them, because people can have the best of intentions and those can pave the path to hell. It can be the foundation of a mask and not trying, but it's just, that's your own experience and that's what you put forth for someone. So these cards are trying to be very explicit, like what is different might be exactly what is needed for a different brain.
Yeah, absolutely. And Jacquelyn, I suppose to you specifically, and unfortunately it's something that we have to come back to again and again and again, but it is that conversation around stimming or self-stimulatory behaviour. And unfortunately we still see people being asked to use their quiet hands or quiet feet, or please sit still,
really
sit and comply, and you can only learn when you're sitting quietly and listening quietly and so on. So would you mind explaining to people how fundamental stimming is to the well-being of an autistic young person or adult indeed?
Yeah, it is fundamental across the lifespan, as you said. I often say, when I see those signs that are quiet hands, feet on the floor, eyes forward, this whole laundry list of this way you are supposed to look. If I was attempting to do that, and if I was pulling it off for any amount of time, there is no possible way I could be taking in any other information that is being put out there. So if that is truly your top priority in a classroom, to have someone attending to their hands and their feet and the chair that they are in, good job. But I'm assuming you want someone to be able to take in information and actively engage with the knowledge that you are trying to put forth. And how people do that will look very different. And certainly we always emphasize when there are behaviors that are damaging, destructive, dangerous to self or others, so disruptive that other learners are not being able to take in that knowledge. You know, we want to be able to do something to support that and to not have that be the case. But things like flapping, things like standing up to work, fidgeting, using tools and strategies in your own personal space, those need to be known as someone's right to access the education. I do not sit down a single second of my day. I never had all 4 feet of the chair on the floor in school. I was a mover and a shaker, and luckily the educators and my parents, my family around me, did not see that kind of activity and movement as problematic.
I think the other piece, Jacquelyn, that's really important to just make sure people are really aware of is not only if you were trying to do the things on that board, right? The quiet feet, quiet hands, looking forward, those types of things, quiet voice. If you were trying to do that, if you're trying to contain that, what that's really doing is not just taking you out of the learning environment. That's one thing. You're not processing anything else, but it's also really amping up your energy, and it's sending you to a place of closer to dysregulation. So on the outside, you might look composed, you might look contained, but on the inside, it's almost like that volcano is getting ready to erupt. And that's a really important thing to keep in mind, because if you have a learner who's trying to do the right thing and gets this physical, visible word appearance, it may really not reflect on what's happening on the inside at all. And that can be really dangerous.
Yeah. And I suppose ultimately as well, ladies, I reckon that you guys would agree that when we are telling a child all of the time to behave in a manner that is complying, or that is behaving neurotypically speaking, with in inverted commas, that we are essentially telling this young person that it's not okay to be themselves. So we are laying those foundation stones for masking and for mental well-being challenge down the line. And lack of self-esteem, I suppose, would be probably some of the more positive experiences that people can have by comparison to how deeply this can impact upon somebody. Would that be fair to say?
Absolutely, yes. When you force someone for the course of their educational career to suppress everything that is natural, and consciously and with so much energy and effort bring forth everything that is unnatural, it is not only fatiguing in the moment and in the short term, it is extremely damaging over the course of a career, physically, mentally, energy-wise, emotion-wise. This is the expectation. Everyone else can do it, no problem. There's something wrong with you.
Yeah.
Message.
Yeah. So essentially the message that we want for people to take away from today is quite literally that we embrace the person's unique neurotype, that we embrace their unique ability to stim and to independently regulate, and that we honor that space, that we respect the space that they come from. Yeah.
Yes. My dream is that stimming is becomes the golden key. Like, people view it as the best information that they can get about someone. The best information they can get from someone to support them, and the best information they can relay back to that person to teach as their rights to be able to engage in an environment.
100%. I think as our knowledge increases, I think that hopefully, fingers crossed, more and more people are starting to realize.
I'm crossing
crossing off cross.
All crossbows crossed, exactly.
Isn't this an eagle pose? Eagle?
It is. But I mean, I think the other piece of this is just to have that really honest conversation, because I'm sure there's some listeners who are going back to some of those other self-stimulatory behaviors that we've mentioned, and they're coming up with things that aren't just flapping and rocking, and they are those dangerous and damaging, destructive, potentially disruptive behaviors. And as Jacquelyn says, this is still really important, useful information for us as partners, because when we see somebody engaging in those types of self-stimulatory behaviors, that should give us a whole different level of understanding about what's happening for them in that moment and what type of support they might need from us. So again, it's not that we want somebody to engage in those behaviors, but we don't want to say, oh, you just can't do that. We want to go, oh my gosh, what's going on for you?
Yeah.
And how do we help you in this moment? So it's about honoring it all the time, but understanding which way, like in those moments, that person might need more support than when they're just doing something that's helping them maintain their level, as Jacquelyn was talking about earlier.
Yeah, and using those moments as what got us to this moment. That's the key.
Yeah, absolutely, questioning. But I suppose even in relation to that, I've got one really, really good friend who has a young person who as a much younger child used to smear fecal matter on walls and so on and so forth. And there was a huge sensory component to that. And that mom, rather than stopping him and saying, no, you can't do that, because absolutely there's a health and safety risk with regards to that, she actually started, she created routine and structured moments during the week where this little person could smear himself from top to toe in Nutella. And
I saw you post
did you see
that
the picture?
I did see that.
I was wondering if it was going to be like a mud bath or something.
From top to toe in Nutella. And this little person is now 10 and he smears himself from top to toe. It's down to a Saturday, but he spends an hour in a bath on a Saturday smearing himself all over and rubbing himself, rolling around in the bath and so on and so forth. And this absolute sensory joy, like having this wonderful sensory moment. And it's enough to kind of meet the need that he has, and support that, and even knowing that it's going to happen again in the next 7 days has been enough to redirect that smearing behavior that mom was seeing. So I suppose that's a wonderful way of showing how to adapt or adjust to meet the needs and to ensure that need is still met, so to say. I suppose, ladies, I'm mindful actually that when I first met you guys, that there was a lot of talk around honouring that, a request for help, and honouring the child's no, for example, and making sure that we keep that young person's voice central. And unfortunately, at the moment, there seems to be a level of, I suppose it's necessary that we address how important it is to honour the child's no. So sometimes in an educational setting specifically, there is an expectation that a child will rub things out and have to start over work-wise and so on and so forth, because it's not done to the expected standard, regardless of whether or not that child might have coordination difficulty, fine motor skill challenges, or is hypermobile, or whatever the case may be. So I suppose I'd love for you guys to weigh in on why it is essential and again fundamental to the child's well-being that we honour that no that the child brings to the table.
So I think Jacquelyn and I would say no is probably one of the most important and empowering words that we can teach anybody how to use, because it really relates to autonomy, and it really relates to that sense of self, and that being able to navigate the world in ways that are authentic to the individual and comfortable for the individual. And that is extremely important. I think anytime we hear the word no, as partners, we should automatically go to the question, why? We shouldn't go to yes, we should go to why, right? It's not countering, it's trying to figure out why that no is coming. And as you laid out, Sharon, and how you framed the question, there's so many different reasons somebody might be saying no. It might be that they need a minute to process the instructions. It might be that they're overwhelmed in the environment. It might be that they feel like they don't have the capacity to do it. I mean, like, we can just keep going and going with those reasons. It could be they're really uncomfortable in a situation. It could be they don't trust you as a partner. But we should be asking all of those questions in our head to try to figure out, is this no a no? and I need to honor and understand and respect that in this moment? Or is this no, I need some additional information. I need additional help. I need you to meet me halfway with this. And so I think whenever someone says no, the first thing I go is why? How do we help support that? But in the absence of not being able to answer the question why, Jacquelyn, I'm going to speak for both of us again. We would always say, if you can't figure it out and you can't figure out if there's additional support needed that's going to help that no go in a different direction, you need to honor that no, because it goes back to that idea of autonomy and sense of self and being able to navigate the world in a safe way.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Jacquelyn, with regards to that no, and the fact that you do believe that it is so fundamental, that it is probably one of the most important words. Why do you believe that to be the case?
Well, when we teach any young person that you always must comply, yes is the only acceptable way, push through at any cost, all of these kinds of messages, they are all like stemming, and their foundation is compliance. And there are so many times in life, inside of school, outside of school, as you go on, where you need to be able to say no. You need to be able to know it's okay to say no. That, in extreme cases, you need to know it's okay to say, no, you cannot touch me. No, you cannot come with me. No, this is not okay for me. And it's not that there aren't going to be times where kids just say no, because it truly is, I don't want to do this. And we can have a discussion about that. But when everything is always compliance, and the times when someone does say no, it's not honored, it's not discussed, no one is trying to figure out why. The message is that you have to say yes, you have to comply. No is bad, yes is good. And it's damaging, and it influences young girls and females disproportionately, I think. That submissive, go along to get along kind of vibe.
Yeah, absolutely. I suppose you really state, or you're really picking up on a really component and key part, that like these little people, for like we speak to little people initially, and like these little people grow up. So these young autistic little people are going to become autistic adults, and autistic adults, we want to make sure that they're not put in positions where they're exceptionally vulnerable to, like we know, and not to go down a different road, but we know that autistic adult females, that there is a higher rate of sexual assault amongst that cohort of the community and so on. So I mean, it's really important that we do absolutely teach that foundation piece around consent and around bodily integrity and bodily autonomy in order to keep people safe, if for no other reason. And I do have to, very tongue-in-cheek, but nonetheless very honestly state that, sometimes we're all asked to do things at times, and there are times where I go, no, not doing that, I don't want to do that, and right. That needs to be okay, rather than unpacking things. Sometimes it just needs to be okay to just go, no, I'm not in the humor for that. Yeah. Does that make sense?
Yes, and so often too, like autistic students have these explicit goals that someone has written, like about taking initiative or requesting or communicating their needs. And then when they say something like, no, I can't do this, or no, I don't want to do this right now, it's not acknowledged in the context of those very goals.
Yeah,
which absolutely. It totally relates to. It's completely discounted as anything positive or anything like that. So it's just...
And I do think it also speaks to this idea of holding autistic individuals to a higher standard than we hold most other individuals to as well. Like if another young person doesn't want to do their homework and they don't turn it in, they just get the 0. Like, there's no outlay coming out of that. There's nothing else happening. But if an autistic person doesn't do it, then it's often there's this pattern of non-compliance, and it goes down this whole
They're
other
rigid.
road.
They're rigid and they're set in their ways.
I think my head explodes sometimes with some of these conversational pieces. It's like, wow. Ladies, can I ask you from an OT standpoint, looking at those kind of regulation tools that we can provide our young people with, what kind of regulation tools work well for young people in general? I suppose it's really important. I acknowledge that we have to look at individualized tools for people specifically. But if we're looking at in a school setting, or if we're looking at educators providing kind of general tools and so on, what kind of things can we provide kiddos with in schools that will support them from a more general standpoint in the event that they don't have access to individualized tools?
So that's a really interesting question, because again, we're all about the individualization, and we want people to dive deep and figure 100%. Out what works specifically for an individual. And we actually have tools around that too, like how to explore different sensory tools and look at how it influences somebody's energy and whether they like it or not. So we go down that road. But you are right. There are times and places where we can think about, what do we know about just nervous systems in general? Like if we have a student who needs to power down, their energy needs to come down, we know that rhythmic vestibular motion, like rocking, is something that's settling to most nervous systems. We can bring in an alternative seating surface, like a rocking chair, or let somebody sit on the floor, or as you're watching me, rock back and forth as I'm talking today. What are you doing?
Even airports have rocking chairs. I think schools can level up.
Right, but I absolutely agree. But even standing to work, I mean, all of you might be getting seasick if you're watching me instead of watching somebody else. I'm very aware that this is a strategy that I use on a regular basis. You have someone who needs to power up or power down, kind of those deep pressure proprioceptive things, giving someone the opportunity to use some resist.
Stop banning gum, schools. Stop banning gums and hoods and hats.
Because Jacquelyn lives in all of those things all of the time.
Sometimes I need my head to be in a squeeze.
Exactly. So I think I mean, but we can think about how do you get pressure? Like when you're in a classroom environment, what are the opportunities? Can we teach kids how to do some isometric exercises at their desk? Can they go to the wall in the classroom and do a wall sit, like just listening to the teacher, but using their body to maintain an upright position? I mean, there's so many ways to think about it, and so much of it we can think about is what positioning looks like for somebody. And when I say positioning, I mean seating. Like how is my body in the classroom, and how am I taking information in? And maybe get away from this 90-90-90 thing that we often think needs to be happening in terms of sitting in a chair at a desk.
Yeah, absolutely. I suppose one of the memories that I have and that I've followed that I've implemented and suggested many times since doing the CERTS training with yourself a couple of years ago, Amy, is that standing desk in class, because that isn't ordinarily something that is available to Irish students at least. And I suppose the idea that somebody can stand up, that they stay within their workspace, but that they can shake and move and wriggle around as much as they need to in order to be able to access that kind of learning. I think even adjusting and altering our environments in that way will work so much better, and will allow for these kiddos to maximize their learning potential so much more, and to access curriculums and so on so much more easily than what this 90 degrees sitting down looks like for these kids. Do you know?
Yeah, and I think the other things that we have to think about, so some of it's about movement, some of it's about pressures, like all of these pieces. Jeff was talking about chewing gum and using, hoods for visual and pressure as well, but also things like doodling and fidgeting, like just being able to normalize those as ways that actually help process attention, because not everybody's a mover and a shaker. Jacquelyn and I just happen to be big movers. So that's kind of where we go first when we start talking about these things. But there are other individuals who auditory and visual information is much more settling for them, or some sort of fine motor task. And so again, we might not be individualizing. What'd you say?
I was going to say there are other people who very much want to be sitting and don't want to do all this up and down and might need a more supportive seat. So we have to consider that profile as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right. And so some of these other things, whether it is something oral sensory like gum or something like a visual motor like a doodling, those things might actually help them process information. So if we're not going to individualize for a specific person, at least having knowledge about this big array of strategies, that it can be big in sensory motor, or it can be, you know, smaller and more contained, fine motor or visual motor in nature. And then also just thinking about the elements outside of sensory that are very regulating is very important. And Jacquelyn could probably speak for the rest of our time on the importance of predictability in her life. But things like schedules, things like knowing end times, even for preferred activities, you know, those things are extremely regulating for all of us. And that's important to keep in mind too. I don't know if Jacquelyn, if you just want to talk a little bit about, just from your perspective, that real importance about predictability for regulation. Like sensory is a huge thing for you, but predictability is also a huge thing for you.
Yeah, predictability is huge. I cannot engage fully in something if I don't know like when it is ending, or how I will know that it is ending and I need to move on to the next thing. That I just need that information. And I also want to emphasize that not just in predictability, it's important to recognize that sensory is so powerful, but there are mismatches stemming from other domains that, sure, sensory can be a great buffer, but if we just throw more and more and more sensory at it, it's not going to be the cause of the solution to the root of the issue. So if I'm experiencing this huge amount of an energy mismatch because of the task demands, because of the social demands, because of some of these other things, executive functioning, sensory can help me, but it's not going to be, I'm going to keep needing more and more support. It's not going to solve the issue at hand. I'll need some other kind of support there. I'll need modifications to what the social expectations are. I'll need written out instructions as to what's going on, some other way to access the information that's going to help not amp that energy up or drag it way down with fatigue.
I suppose it's really important, essentially, so Jacquelyn, that people look at a person as an entire person and not to compartmentalize sensory versus anxiety. Do you know?
All humans.
Do you know, it's just I suppose people are so quick to kind of go, okay, sensory and anxiety and learning challenges and diagnosis of intellectual disability, and you know, and compartmentalize each and every part of this person, instead of going, okay, actually anxiety is going to impact sensory and sensory is going to impact anxiety. Both of these can impact eating patterns for individuals, and both of the, and so on and so forth, if that makes sense. So I suppose essentially what people need to be aware of is that we don't compartmentalize. We look at the person as a human being, rightly so, Jacquelyn. Can I ask you guys as well, now the term that I would have been very familiar with here is sensory memory, but I know that on a recent training I did with you guys that you spoke about I'm open to correction on my phrasing, but you spoke about post-traumatic sensory flashback. Am I using the right term that you guys had used? That kind of remembering almost physiologically moments of dysregulation previously. So would you guys be able to explain that to listeners, please?
Yeah. So when we introduce that, we often talk about it as a time where people often experience extreme dysregulation or can go into an extreme dysregulation seemingly out of the blue to people who are around them. And we often talk about it as a post-traumatic stress kind of triggered event. So that there's some thing in their environment that kind of unleashes this full memory experience of a previous experience. And we know that autistic learners, neurodivergent learners, have really strong Gestalt memories, which means they don't just kind of remember thoughts about a previous situation, but they remember everything about it. And when they remember everything about it, they're right back in the middle of that experience once it's triggered for them. So they go right back to what it felt like to experience it. And so that's where we kind of, I think, what you're referring to, Sharon, is we were talking about this in the context of one of these places where we see extreme dysregulation, and we see individuals who often aren't necessarily available for learning and interacting at that moment, and that the behaviors can be really intense for individuals because it really is about this whole body experience. Jacquelyn, I don't know if you want to talk about it a little bit from what it feels like from you, or just your experience in general.
Yeah, it's all encompassing. I think when we talked about it recently, I said it's like you're transported to like a snow globe of the experience.
Yeah, we did talk about that.
It's like you are in it, surrounded by it, and there is nothing else. You cannot get out to anything else, and it will be there. So it can be very intense. And these types of memories are not always negative. They can be spurred on to positive experience as well, and those can be just as difficult to get out of for other reasons. But when they are these overwhelmingly negative, awful experiences, it is, like I said, a snow globe of encapsulation. And when you do come out of it, it's extreme. For me, it's extreme fatigue,
Okay.
Drain, and it is kind of like coming to, if you've ever been like knocked out. Very, very intense.
Okay, thank you for that. Can I ask you guys, based upon that then, is there any kind of a strategy, we'd say, that if you know that somebody is going to be going into an environment where they've previously been triggered, or they've previously had very negative experiences, and they've had extreme feelings of dysregulation or overwhelm, is there any kind of a strategy that we can provide as individuals who work with or support autistic individuals to prevent that being their experience when they re-enter this environment?
Well, that's really challenging. First and foremost, I will say knowledge is power. So the self-understanding of when that might happen, and knowing that that's, for our neurology, perfectly normal for something like that to happen, is already powerful. Because when someone is headed to an environment that they don't like to begin with, and they know it might cause this extreme reaction for them, there's even more anxiety there. There's even more amp around that. So I think as much as we can, some preparation, a lot of warning that we may have to go to this environment. And that's assuming that we actually do have to go to this environment. We likely don't. Short of a few things, we likely don't. Even in this world, in this past year, we have been able to make almost everything virtual. So even when it's a health appointment, there are ways you can do virtual health appointments. If an office, a dentist's office, sorry, Amy, a doctor's office, a hospital is intense, and you really don't need to be there for any kind of procedure. I mean, we have uncovered many ways that the world can adapt for the masses. So why not for autistic people? I could go off on a tangent on that.
Well, and I think it is important to follow up. Your examples are really real and for those extreme intense situations that have been very triggering. But we also know of students who might struggle in one room in the school or something like that. So there are levels of these experiences, and the trauma associated with them, I suppose. We should be like thinking about that broadly. So again, I think knowledge is still power, and for people to know that if this is an expected transition, and we do want to help this young person, maybe this young person actually wants to go into this environment, but is struggling with an experience that they've had there before, right? There can be ways to support them to do that, but we also have to be realistic that these things require learning and time. So there's never going to be a magic switch that we can say, oh, just give him this fidget, or here, give him this, schedule, and that everything will be fine. Yes, we can build strategies in around that might be helpful, but we also have to be very realistic that if we are going to support somebody in an environment that maybe they have to go into or they want to go into, but it's still hard for them, that this isn't a one and done sort of kind of deal, that we need to be there to provide support as well. Yes.
I just want to say too that it is challenging, and it might take a lot of time and a lot of preparation and a lot of back and forth trial and error to get this done. But I will say up front that things like making them stay in the environment, like desensitization type crap, will never work. And also, what also will never work is them saying that if they're trying to give you information, like it was the smell of this pole, it was the way this person walked, their stride was the same as any information they give you, do not put that as dramatic or being too sensitive. Those are huge keys, and they are communicating to you exactly what it was about that environment. So don't discount the information someone is giving you, and certainly do not make them stay in the environment.
I have one last thing I need to say about this. And I think because so many times when we enter into these conversations and people are listening to you, Jacquelyn, they automatically go to this place of a person who can tell us those things, right? Like somebody's stride or the smell. But this same sensory experience happens for individuals who are pre-symbolic in their communication, who cannot convey this information to us. And so if we see someone who consistently is having a hard time when they enter in an environment, or consistently have a hard time around a specific activity or a specific individual, or consistently, like if we see that happen more than once, we should be stopping and going back to that question that we were asking earlier of why. What is happening for this individual, and how do I Sharon, you're not going to get to talk today.
This is really the last point.
I'll stop. Okay, go ahead. But I think I made my point.
I was going to say, and that what you're saying, Amy, is perfect. And yes, I agree. And if it's like, but how can I know, which is a great thing for a neurotypical partner to think when they're supporting someone with a different brain. How can I know? Please reach out to autistic communities and describe the situation, describe the environment, and what is happening. And there are autistic adults and teens and young people, older people, who will give you their thoughts and be very appreciative that you are seeking information from the autistic community.
And I'm just going to go out and validate, because Sharon still can't get to talk. No, but I'm going to validate, because Jacquelyn and I do school consultations together. And I will say that I see a lot. I see a lot more than many neurotypical individuals see.
Yeah.
But sitting next to Jacquelyn, every now and then she will just drop this bomb out of nowhere, and I'll be like, okay, there was no way that I could possibly know that, because I don't experience the world with that neurology. And as soon as she says it, it's like, that's the key. That's what everybody else in this room missed. And once a team takes that nugget of information and applies it to maybe a 3-year-old pre-symbolic student who's not using words in any way to connect and communicate, but they're taking her insight from her neurology, it changes the world for that child. And so when she says reach out to the autistic community, reach out to the autistic community.
100%, 100%. I know that I often, like you guys know, and everybody knows, that my oldest young person here is now 24, and he is the most wonderful autistic young person that you could ever hope to meet. And I oftentimes will collaborate with him and look at different areas and so on, and different kind of supports and strategies that we might be looking to implement for young autistic people who I would support, and because he is the person who is best positioned to inform what I'm going to implement. And he's also the person who will tell me, ma'am, cop on in the name of God Almighty, which is what you need,
Yes.
Do you know what I mean? But
I always say she level sets me, and she does. Like, we level up and level set.
Exactly. But I suppose I'm cognizant that in Ireland here, that not everybody has access to the autism community, or is even aware that there is such a thing as an autism community. So I suppose I would expect that the best practice in that situation is that people just change the blooming environment that is problematic for the child wherever possible. Make as many reasonable adjustments as is possible to try and best support the young person's access to that. Would that be fair to say?
Yeah, absolutely. In the absence of being able to do that, but social media makes the autistic community so accessible.
100%.
And in those communities, as long as you're going in honestly wanting to learn and understand, they are the most selfless bunch of people in terms of giving their perspectives,
absolutely.
and weighing in. It's just amazing. But in the absence of doing that, Sharon, yes, absolutely. We're going to look at the activity. We're going to look at the environment. We're going to start to deconstruct to try to figure out what's going on.
Because I suppose what's going on in my head is rural Ireland, where you might have literally 12 students in the whole school. And where it's social media, as great as it is, that people mightn't have great connectivity, that they might not actually be able to even access the internet in lots. I'm living probably 10 minutes, not even 10 minutes from Cork Airport, and I may as well be living in the Himalayas for how great the internet is here sometimes. So if I'm living that close to Cork Airport, you can imagine how difficult it is for somebody who was living on the side of a mountain, for example. Yes. Do you know? So I suppose I suppose just to make sure that people realize that whether or not they have access, that they still can adjust and accommodate a kiddo in whatever which way they can. Do you know?
Absolutely.
Guys, can I ask you guys then, with regards to stigma, because unfortunately autistic individuals, and I know that even in this house that individuals still speak about being worried that other people are going to view them differently, or whatever the case may be, if they engage in that kind of full happy flap, or whatever the case may be. How do we support our young people to feel comfortable enough to be able to be their true, authentic, autistic self and engage with whatever they need to in order to support their regulation and their sense of well-being?
I will say that I'm a bit biased because I have zero social motivation. So for me, it's easier than it is for some, I do believe, to just go flaptastic wild out there. That being said, I think this foundation for advocacy and the understanding of these things as legitimate needs and rights is key. And I also think that another huge piece that needs to be tackled by us, by educators, by everyone, parents, all of society, is we need to be educating neurotypical peers. We need to be giving them knowledge, teaching them why. Because this world is always going to be a two-way street. We're always going to have neurodivergent minds, neurotypical minds working together in the same world. So the more we can build this understanding for both parties involved, the better off it will be. Because if there are, I'm going to probably break my brain explaining this, if there are, you know, all these neurotypical people who are indeed sending signals in some way to autistic people that this is weird, broken, uncomfortable, you can't be doing this. I know people do explicitly say that. That stigma will always exist.
Yeah. Yeah.
Absolutely. Did I do okay with that, Amy?
You did. Impressive. No, but I think, you know, I think that's what makes our partnership so powerful is this embodiment of this two-way street, that there are two perspectives, and it is about it's not about the melding of them, like she's retaining her identity, I'm retaining my identity, but it's that finding that common ground. And that
you want to be the salad bowl, not the melting pot.
All right, salad. But I think that it's extremely important. So yes, we want to make sure that we are not just putting all the perceived onus for change and development and growth on the autistic individual, but we as a community are leveling up our understanding and our support as well.
And you know what is an absolute truth? In any environment, like in my workplace where I have advocated for my needs, the neurotypical partners in that workplace have benefited. I can say that 100%, because now they'll say things like, we need this meeting to be over for Jacquelyn.
And
or I need to leave now too. So this agenda item that we made to show you exactly when the meeting ends, called walk-in items and story time, that's when we're all going to idle chit chat. I need to go too, because I don't have time for this. So
I love it.
No one is harmed by like fewer fluorescent lights, being able to have the option to stand and move, and you know, lowering environmental noises. No one is really harmed by that stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. And I suppose,
I think just the other part is that we're at an exciting point, I think, in just autistic history. I don't know what else to call it at this moment, but there are more adults who are out and proud about their autism, and who are advocating for their needs and their rights. And that's paving a pathway for the autistic youth too. So it's also helping educate the community as well. And so I have a lot of hope that we're at a different place in terms of being able to truly, when we say embrace and understand and support neurodiversity, that we're moving in a direction that can do that, and not just say we do that.
Yeah, absolutely. Because I suppose that's the point I was going to make, was that that if we are going to autism level up the non-autistic community, it's really, really important that it's not just this whole awareness, autism is this, and this is what this means, and this is what that means. There needs to be a real bottom up approach to ensuring that the autistic person's voice is kept central to everything. And like the person who comes to mind oftentimes when I think about that is Damien Milton, and that kind of double empathy theory, and making sure that the responsibility doesn't just lie with the autistic person, that we do absolutely hold a level of responsibility as well for any interaction that we engage with, and so on. So I suppose, and additionally, coming at it from a parental standpoint, with that parent hat on, it's the responsibility of the parents of kids in schools to ensure that their child grows up being respectful of other individuals and their neurotype, and not coming at these kinds of neurotypes from a judgmental standpoint. Do you know?
Yes. We're with you.
Kate, can I ask you guys, I suppose, with regards to school then, and with regards to primary, now I don't know, I'm not going to pretend that I know anything about the American educational system, so I'm going to speak about the Irish one. The Irish education system is preschool is 3 to 5, primary school is 5 to 12 pretty much, and then secondary is 12 to 18, and then you've got university and third level, different kinds of colleges and so on. So what would be, first of all, what would be considered educational best practice to support and to ensure that the autistic voice stays central in any educational setting? And then secondly, how can we ensure that people actually follow this educational best practice? I can see Jacquelyn going, okay.
I'm gonna pass that over.
That one, because I have to have like some funnel of focus. I need like some focal point.
Okay.
There's like a swarm.
Yeah. No, I think it's a huge question. And I think the idea in any educational system, regardless of where you are in the world, is it is an individualized education plan. And when we say individualized, that should mean that the person is held central to the plan. And that's extremely important. So what we want to think about is, when we're thinking about supporting individuals, is honoring and understanding who they are and what is meaningful for them. Now, again, if we're talking about somebody in secondary school who is a conversational individual, they may be able to give us that information. Yeah, this is a skill or ability that would be important for me to understand, to be able to work on. This is a priority for me. This is going to help set me up for my graduation, right?
Yeah.
When we're talking about someone who maybe is in that preschool or that nursery setting, they're not going to be able to give us that same type of information, but we can be very careful observers to learn who they are, what makes them tick, what they're interested in, and use that information to help us figure out how to support them in ways that are meaningful for them. We also do want to leverage and access families whenever we can. So I think, Jacquelyn and I often talk about person-centered education first and foremost, but person-centered / family-centered, kind of bringing in what those priorities are. And again, if someone can tell us, awesome. And if they can't tell us, it should be on us again to say what, maybe not why this time, but what makes this person tick? What are they interested in? What do they want? What are they trying to do that they're struggling? Those types of things.
Perfect.
I think you're a good funnel. Oh no, you froze.
No, on my screen you're frozen. Can you guys hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you, Jacquelyn.
Oh, I think we're unfreezing. Okay.
So now we're all unfreezing. Great stuff.
Perfect. I hate being freezing. I'm done with it. What was I going to say? Oh, I think something that is also key, I want to say two things because that's what otherwise I'll just go off. One is, again, if educators and staff are reaching out to the autistic community, we need more autistic people telling schools and workplace environments what things have gone well for them and what haven't gone well for them. And along that same line, we need to be hiring more autistic people to teach, to be those one-on-ones, to be in schools. Just like with any marginalized population, diverse hiring is an amazing thing that we need to prioritize in all areas. And that also is that's huge because an autistic student sees an autistic adult in a professional role who is teaching them, and that is powerful as well. So that's one point I want to make. And the other is, and this is in general for all of education, whether we're talking about autistic or neurotypical students, so often schools today and all educational systems around the world, I think, but especially here, so maybe not as much in Ireland, the focus becomes so much on the curriculum, the single, unit that I need to get through right now. And it's less about actually learning for the sake of learning and how to gain knowledge. So I always try to say, more focus on teaching students how they learn. If you focus on giving someone the tools to understand how they are able to learn, how they are able to engage, they will be able to get any of the content they need down the line. And that has been so true in my life. There are subjects that I had in elementary school and in high school that I did not actually learn a thing. I did not know how to access the content in any way. And it wasn't until I went back to some of the same content later, but with a much better understanding of what I need and how to access material for myself, that then I was like, oh, I don't remember. I did not get any of this information in school. So learning how one learns, and that is, that goes back to knowing how you are able to engage, knowing your rights and your needs in order to be a participant in an environment and access the content. That is the best tool set any educator can give their students.
That is a fantastic information, ladies. Thank you so much. So guys, 2 questions left for you. So I suppose, first of all, can I ask you, what is the most important piece of advice you would give to a parent supporting their child in developing their regulatory skills?
I'll start, and I would just say to be a very careful observer and to follow your child's lead. Do not assume that you know what they need based on what your own profile is and what feels good in your body or is powering up or powering down your body, but really respond and respect how they experience their environment and follow their lead. And if they can give you information, great, but if not, just be that careful observer.
Perfect.
I don't think there's anything I really need to expand on there. I would emphasize again to parents to reach out to the autistic community, that they are your best resource.
Perfect. And ladies, final question, because I know that I will have you back on again, hopefully in the next short term, because I know that you've got the most magnificent publication coming out. So people, anybody listening into this podcast, watch this space. There's going to be an amazing resource online and streamed very, very shortly. So your final question, ladies, is what about the most important piece of advice you would give to a teacher or a principal, a school leader, in making the educational environment conducive for the autistic child or teen?
Do you want me to start?
I'm going to start, and I'm going to say that, I think in education today, there's a big focus on inclusion, and there is this notion that, oh, we have autistic students here, or we have, hopefully you say autistic students and not students with autism, but we have autistic people and we are supporting them. They're in our classrooms. I think my reminder is that access without support is not opportunity. So figuring out that support is so key to ensuring that you are actually providing an accessible and productive environment to your autistic learners.
I love that. Access plus, say that again, Jacquelyn, sorry now. Access
without support is not opportunity. And that comes from a person named Tinto, that's his last name. It came from the higher education literature when universities began enrolling more diverse populations, but just saying, yeah, we're diverse now, they're here, but without actually changing anything to accommodate those diverse communities.
Perfect. I love that. Thank you for that, Jacquelyn. Sorry, Amy, I interrupted you.
No, the only thing that I want to say is that is one of the most true statements. And every time she says it, it just fills me up. But then I go to this place and know what support is, right? So different minds need different types of support. So we're talking about neurodivergent learners. They need support. Yeah, that one is you. I'm quoting you, but it's so important, right? To have that follow-up is when we talk about it's only access when you have support. But what is support? Support for your neurodivergent learners, for your autistic students, is going to look very different and supports for your neurotypical students. And as a community, get ready to embrace that and make sure it's available.
Perfect. Ladies, thank you so much. As always, it's an absolute pleasure.
It's great to
Thank
talk to you
you.
again.